He took my $10 million house and mocked me publicly. My own lawyer, the only person I could trust, told me to sit still and watch the ceremony. This story is not about forgiveness. It is about a calculation. It is about waiting for the right moment, when my opponent was at his most arrogant, to remind him that the foundation of every empire can hide its own collapse. My name is Alara Vance. I am 38 years old. My profession, my entire life, is finding the truth hidden beneath the surface. As an architectural historian and conservator, I have a practiced eye for seeing past layers of cheap paint and gaudy additions to find the bones of a structure, the story it was meant to tell. I can peel back time with a scalpel and a solvent, revealing the original intent. I met my husband, Julian Croft, when he was attempting to do the same for himself. He was and is the brilliantly charismatic CEO of Ether Dynamics, a private artificial intelligence company rising so fast it left scorch marks. When we met, he was all raw code and disruptive energy, looking for someone to help renovate his image, to give his new money ambition the patina of old-world stability. I was captivated by his drive, by the way he spoke about the future as if he were already building it. Our home was the Mercer House, a $10 million historic mansion in Savannah. I bought it with my inheritance, long before Julian, when it was a magnificent, sagging ruin. I spent 5 years of my life restoring it. This was not a renovation. It was a resurrection. Every day for 5 years, I was on site, supervising the stabilization of the foundation, sourcing period-accurate heart pine for the floors, and spending 6 months just to replicate the exact milk paint pigment for the library. I knew the scent of the house in every season, the faint, sweet smell of beeswax and lemon oil on the grand staircase, the cool, earthy smell of the cellar. It was my masterpiece, a registered historical landmark featured in architectural journals. It was not just an asset, it was my soul translated into wood and stone. Julian loved to host investors there. He would stand in the grand salon, his arm wrapped around my waist, praising the house as the symbol of our shared vision. He loved the idea of the house, the weight it carried. But in private, his patience for authenticity was thin. He was constantly aggravated by my obsession with original integrity over modern utility. He wanted to rip out 19th century walls for open-plan living. I wanted to preserve the original flow. He wanted to install recessed smart lighting. I insisted on restoring the gasoliers. "Ilara, does it really matter?" He would sigh, frustrated. I mistook his restlessness for the quirk of a man who lived perpetually in the next generation. Then, 3 months ago, he came to me with a solution. He called it a heritage trust. He sat me down in the library, the very room I had saved, and explained that as Ether Dynamics was growing, so were its liabilities. "This is the best way to protect it, Ilara," he said, his voice a mask of earnest concern. "To protect your work, we move the house into this trust, and it's completely insulated from my creditors, from any potential legal issues with the company. It's untouchable." He presented the documents on a Friday evening. It was a thick, intimidating stack of legalese. We were already late for a major charity gala. My silk gown was laid out, the car was waiting, and I was focused on the speech I had to give. "My lawyers need the signature tonight, just a formality," he said, straightening his tuxedo cuffs, his eyes already on the door. "It just puts everything in order." I trusted him. I was distracted by the rush of the evening, by the weight of the diamonds at my throat, by the simple, unwavering belief that this man was my partner. I picked up the pen, I found the tabs he had marked, and I signed my name, over and over, without reading a single word of the fine print. It was the first and largest mistake of my life. The warmth of that Friday night, the memory of his hand on my back, faded quickly. The next 3 months were a slow chill. Julian became a ghost in our own home. He was always at the Ether Dynamics office, always in late-night coding sessions, or flying to Atlanta for fundraising rounds. The man who used to share every detail of his ambition now spoke in vague, corporate summaries. When I questioned the distance, he'd touch my cheek, his eyes already looking past me. "It's just this next push, Ilara. Then I'm all yours." His excuses were plausible, and I was a fool who wanted to believe them. I had been in Charleston for 2 days, a short consulting trip to advise on the preservation of a historic library. I remember pulling up to the house, feeling the familiar relief of returning to my sanctuary. But the relief evaporated. A black sedan I didn't recognize was parked in my driveway. A man in an ill-fitting suit was standing by the front portico, holding a clipboard. He looked less like a guest and more like an undertaker. "Ilara Vance?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. "Yes. Can I help you?" He didn't answer. He just handed me a thick, standard business envelope. I tore it open, right there on the bluestone path. The smell of my own camellias heavy in the air. The paper was cold. The language was colder. It was not a letter. It was a formal notice. Notice to vacate. It mentioned a petition for dissolution of marriage filed in the state of Delaware, citing irreconcilable differences. My heart stopped. Delaware. We lived in Georgia. His company was incorporated in Delaware. And then, the killing blow. The document referenced the Heritage Trust, the trust I had signed without reading, the trust that, according to this paper, granted Julian Croft, as the sole trustee, full managerial discretion and control over all assets within it. My signature, the one I had scribbled in a hurry, had not protected the house. It had gifted it. My $10 million inheritance, the home I bought before I even met him, was now his property to manage, and he was managing me out of it. I ran to the front door. My key, the heavy brass original, slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. It stopped hard, changed. I hammered on the door, my name catching in my throat. The door opened, but it wasn't Julian. It was Sabina Hayes, the COO of Ether Dynamics, a woman made of sharp angles and cold efficiency, whose competence I had always grudgingly respected, but whose presence I had always found unsettling. She stood there, in my foyer, holding a tablet. "Sabina, what is going on? Where is Julian?" "Mr. Croft is unavailable," she said, her voice flat. "We were hoping to have this completed before your arrival. It's inefficient. Really." I pushed past her. The scene in the Grand Salon made me physically ill. Strangers, hired movers, were swarming. They were wrapping my 19th century Biedermeier chairs in cheap plastic. They were dumping books from the library shelves, books I had spent years collecting into cardboard boxes labeled MISC. There was no care. There was no respect. It was a violation. My life's work was being dismantled with the brutal efficiency of a corporate downsizing. "You can't do this," I whispered, turning back to Sabina. She looked at me, not with pity, but with something close to boredom. "It's already done, Ilara. The trust is ironclad. Julian's lawyers were very thorough." She actually smiled then, a tight, satisfied pull of the lips. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a bank check. "Julian asked me to give you this." I looked at the check. It was for a paltry sum, $5,000. "This is," she said, savoring the words, "a final payment for your time and contributions." Julian felt it was generous. $5,000. For 5 years of restoration. For the house I owned. It wasn't a settlement. It was a tip. It was the final calculated insult, designed to reduce my life's passion into a line item. "Your personal effects are being moved to a storage unit in West Savannah," Sabina continued, tapping her tablet. "The first month is prepaid. After that, it's your responsibility." A mover carrying my grandmother's portrait brushed past me. I was a stranger. I was trespassing in my own home, humiliated, blinded by a rage so cold it felt like shock. I turned and walked away. I left my key on the steps, the key that no longer fit, and walked away from the house I had poured my blood and tears into. I moved into a furnished rental apartment on the edge of the city. It was a box of beige walls and cheap laminate furniture that smelled faintly of disinfectant and despair. I spent my days there, surrounded by nothing that was mine, trying to make sense of the legal nightmare. I called lawyers. Most of them, upon hearing the name Julian Croft and Heritage Trust, told me it was a complex battle that would take months, if not years, to even begin. The legal system, I was learning, moved with a glacial slowness that protected the wealthy and crushed the blindsided. The real horror, the public execution, came exactly 2 weeks later. My phone buzzed with a notification from a local news feed. It was the cover of Savannah Society magazine, our city's glossy arbiter of social standing. The headline was explosive. Tech CEO Julian Croft and COO Sabina Hayes engaged. I bought a copy from a nearby convenience store, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the money out. The article was a masterpiece of cruel, calculated press. It was a glowing profile of Julian, the visionary, and Sabina, the brilliant woman of the future who stood beside him. And then, there was me. I was mentioned, not by name, but as his past-obsessed ex-wife, a charming but tragic figure who was unable to keep pace with his forward momentum. They painted my 5-year restoration not as a triumph of historical preservation, but as a quaint, dusty hobby that Julian had politely indulged. The final suffocating humiliation was in the last paragraph. They were announcing their engagement party, which would also serve as their wedding reception. It was to be an exclusive event, a future launch party, as they were calling it. They were celebrating the next phase of ether dynamics, and they were holding it at the Mercer House. My work, my 5 years of sweat and scholarship. It was now nothing more than a stage, a backdrop for their victory. They were not just stealing my home, they were stealing its story, rewriting its history with me erased. 4 days later, a forwarded piece of mail arrived from the storage unit. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the new, sharp Ether logo. It was an invitation, addressed to Ms. Alara Vance, at the exact address of the storage unit, a deliberate, vicious gesture to remind me of exactly what I had been reduced to. It was an invitation to my own execution. That night, I went online. Sabina's Instagram, previously private, was now wide open, a strategic part of their media campaign. She had posted a video. It was a walkthrough of the Mercer house, my house. She was walking through the salon, her sharp heels clicking on the heart pine floors I had saved. It's all a bit heavy, isn't it? She said to the camera, gesturing vaguely at the restored plasterwork. Julian is so forward-thinking. We need a space that reflects that. We're planning a full modernization. Lots of glass, lots of steel. We're going to open this all up. Bring in the light. She was panning the camera over the library, my sanctuary, and laughing. I mean, who even has this many books? I watched it. I watched it again. I watched as she mocked my choices, as she planned the destruction of my work, all with a triumphant, self-satisfied smile. I felt the sickness, the deep, hollow grief of my expulsion. But as I watched her hand sweep dismissively across the fireplace I had rebuilt from reclaimed brick, the grief began to change. The sorrow didn't disappear, but it crystallized. It became cold, dense, and heavy. The blood in my veins slowed and sharpened. The grief had burned away, leaving behind something new. It was a foundation, stronger than stone. It was a cold, focused, and patient rage. The rage that had crystallized inside me was a cold, hard weapon, but I didn't know how to wield it. I took my grief, the magazine, and the invitation to the 4th lawyer on my list. His name was Marcus Cole. He had been recommended in a whisper by a colleague, described as a man who handled complex situations, for people who had more to lose than just their reputation. His office was old-world Savannah, all dark wood and leather-bound books, but his eyes were sharp and modern. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, who listened more than he spoke. He let me talk for 10 solid minutes, my voice shaking with a controlled fury as I laid out the eviction, the magazine, the public humiliation. I want an injunction. I want a restraining order. We have to stop this wedding. I finished, my hands clenched on his polished mahogany desk. That is my house. He is holding a party in my house, which he stole. Marcus didn't react. He simply put on a pair of reading glasses and pulled the thick trust document toward him, the one I had finally managed to get a copy of. He read in silence for a long time. The only sound in the room was the slow, heavy tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, he took his glasses off and folded his hands. "This is ironclad Ilara," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "He has been planning this for a very long time. The jurisdiction in Delaware, the wording of the trusteeship, the waiver of community property. It is a fortress. Legally, as of this moment, that house is his." A cold dread washed over me, extinguishing the fire. So that's it. He just wins. He takes my life's work, my home, and he gets to throw a party in it to celebrate. "Then I will go," I said, standing up, the panic rising in my throat. "I don't care. I will go to the wedding. I will stand outside the gates. I will tell every investor and every reporter exactly what he did." "No." Marcus's voice cut through my desperation with the sharpness of a scalpel, and I sat back down. He leaned forward, his expression intense. "You will not. You will do exactly nothing. You will let him have his wedding. You will let him stand in that garden. You will let him say his vows." "Why?" I demanded, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Why would I let him have this triumph?" "Because Julian is smart," Marcus said. "But he is arrogant. He thinks he has won. He has already categorized you as the past-obsessed ex-wife. He is expecting an emotional confrontation. He wants you to show up, to scream, to cry. It confirms his narrative. It makes you look unhinged and desperate, and it makes him look like the stable, calm man of the future. You will not give him the satisfaction." He slid the trust documents aside and pushed a different, slimmer file toward me. "Your fight isn't in family court, Ilara. That is a slow, messy war of attrition he has been preparing for. Your war is in federal court." I opened the file. The header read, "Ether Dynamics, Series C funding. Julian is in the final stages of closing his Series C funding round," Marcus said. $100 million, maybe more. He is using this wedding, this house, this new power couple image as the final proof to his investors that he is stable, successful, and in control. He is not just celebrating a marriage, he is closing a deal. I looked at him, the pieces rearranging in my mind, forming a new, colder picture. This wasn't a divorce lawyer, this was a corporate predator. Marcus leaned back, his chair giving a faint creak. "So you will let him finish the ceremony. Let him put that ring on her finger, because the moment he says 'I do' to Sabina, who as COO has signed off on every Ether document, he is marrying her as a legal accomplice to everything he did to get to this day. He is making her a co-conspirator in front of 200 witnesses." He let the words hang in the air. The chill in my veins returned, but it was no longer fear. It was steel. He was right. This was never about the house. The house was just a symbol. This was about taking everything. The money, the company, the future he had stolen. I wasn't a conservator anymore. I was a demolitions expert. This isn't just about a bad marriage. "Ilara," Marcus told me, his voice low. "Ether Dynamics is already on the SEC's watch list." We hear whispers. His vision, his breakthrough AI. It's all moving too fast. It's possible his entire company is built on stolen technology. For 5 years, I had lived with a man I thought I knew. I realized I hadn't just been restoring a house. I had been living inside the meticulously crafted facade of a con man. My skill set, I suddenly understood, was not useless. My entire career was based on finding the truth beneath the paint, identifying the structural weaknesses hidden behind new plaster, and recognizing the original work underneath a forgery. I just needed to apply the same principles to Julian's digital life. He had been arrogant. In his rush to erase me, he had been efficient, but not perfect. He changed the main locks, but he forgot about the digital ones. I still had access to our shared family cloud account, the one we used for vacations and taxes. He had forgotten to disconnect me. He had left behind 2 old backup hard drives in the attic of a storage unit I still paid for, deeming them obsolete. I began my excavation. I didn't just look, I analyzed. I remembered old passwords, pet names, significant dates. The one he used for his first ever startup, Pioneer 1999. It was laughably simple, and it opened a legacy server he thought was decommissioned. The first find was a video file. I found a folder of archived Zoom meetings. The recordings were clinical. Julian and Sabina, their faces illuminated by their screens. I found one from over a year ago, 6 months before I signed the trust. The Alara factor is a liability. Sabina's voice, crisp and emotionless. The house is the perfect asset, but she's tied to it. We need to phase her out of the trust structure. Julian nodded. Handle it. Just make it look like protection. She trusts me. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a long-term strategy. I dug deeper, moving from the personal betrayal to the professional one. I found email archives, threads between Julian and 2 specific engineers from a rival AI startup in Austin, Texas. The dates were damning, just weeks before that company suddenly and mysteriously folded, citing a catastrophic R&D failure. 3 months later, Ether Dynamics announced its revolutionary new platform, and those same 2 engineers were on Julian's payroll. But I needed the technology itself. The smoking gun. I found a hidden directory, buried deep in a server. It was labeled Mirror Seer. I remember staring at it, my heart tightening. He had named his secret project after the house. After my house. I thought it was about the acquisition of the property. Some legal file. I opened the README file inside. My breath caught. It wasn't about the house. It was an acronym. Modular Emulation Resource, Coded Entity Recognition. It was the core algorithm. It was the stolen technology. He had been so arrogant, so filled with contempt, that he had named his grand theft after the very thing he was stealing from me. He was hiding it in plain sight, mocking me with every keystroke. The Mirror Seer files connected everything. I found the Series C pitch deck. It was all there. The wedding wasn't just a party, it was an investor relations event. The house was listed as a corporate asset. My restoration, my work, was being presented as his stability, his taste. He was using the wedding, the new wife, and my house as a performance to prove his reliability and close the $100 million deal. I didn't stop. I worked for 48 hours straight. My apartment lit only by the glow of the screen. I copied everything. The Zoom recordings, the emails, the full Mirror Seer codebase with the original Austin timestamps. I downloaded every file, every piece of his digital life, and loaded it onto a small, encrypted hard drive. I felt like a historian sealing a time capsule, except this one was a bomb. I called Marcus. I have it, I said. I have the foundation, and it's rotten. Marcus was impressed with the encrypted drive. He called it a precise demolition charge. He took the data to his contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission. The response was immediate, but cautious. They were aggressively interested, he reported back. But the code was heavily encrypted. They had Julian's emails, but the core Mirror Seer algorithm was locked. The SEC needed more than just a locked box. They needed the key. They needed a witness who could place the code in Julian's hands and testify to its origins. Julian's fatal flaw, I realized, was his belief that he could control everyone through money or intimidation. He assumed that everyone he discarded would simply disappear. I knew I couldn't be his only victim. A man who builds an empire on stolen goods leaves a trail of the dispossessed. I just had to find them. My excavation had given me a name, David Liu, the former chief technology officer of Ether Dynamics. According to the press releases from a year ago, he had resigned to pursue other opportunities. According to the timestamps on the Mir-Sear files, his resignation coincided perfectly with the finalization of the stolen code. Finding him was difficult. He had gone quiet. I eventually tracked him down, not through professional channels, but through a forum for rare book collectors, a passion we apparently shared. I sent him a message, not about Julian, but about a first edition of a book I knew he was looking for. We met in a dusty, quiet bookshop in the city's historic district. He was a thin, nervous man with brilliant, haunted eyes. He was terrified. "I cannot talk about Ether Dynamics," he said immediately, his hands trembling. "I signed an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Julian will ruin me." "He already has, hasn't he?" I said softly. I didn't push. I just slid a single printed-out sheet of paper across the table. It was a piece of his own original code from the Austin startup, side by side with a line from Mir-Sear. The timestamp was from 3 days after he was resigned. He stared at it. The color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" "He forgot to disconnect me from a cloud server," I said. "He named it Mir-Sear." "After the house." David's fear visibly turned into a cold, intellectual fury. The same fury I had felt. He saw his life's work, his genius, stolen and repackaged as Julian's. "He didn't even understand it," David whispered, his finger tracing the code. "He stole it, but he didn't understand its elegance. He just saw the profit." "The SEC is interested," I said, "but the code is locked. They need the encryption keys. They need you. David." He was quiet for a full minute. Then he looked up at me, his eyes no longer haunted, but sharp. "I never gave him all the keys," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "The core module. I kept a back door. I always knew he was a thief." David Liu agreed to be our witness. He had the missing keys. He had the original, uncompiled source code. We had our key to the fortress. Now I needed my own key. I needed to get back into the house. I changed out of my beige apartment clothes and put on the uniform of Alara Vance, architectural historian. I went to the Savannah Heritage Commission, a group of people I had worked with for a decade. I feigned a deep, professional panic. I showed them Sabina's Instagram video. "Glass and steel," I said, my voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "In the Mercer house, they are talking about opening up the Grand Salon. That room has load-bearing walls from 1871. Their horror was immediate and authentic. This is a registered landmark. Alara. They cannot do that without full commission approval." "I know," I said, leaning in. "But they are hosting a massive event in 2 days. 200 guests. Heavy equipment. What if they damage the irreplaceable plasterwork? What if their modernization has already begun, illegally, under the cover of a party?" I wasn't trying to stop the wedding. That was the beauty of the plan. I was using their own event, their own arrogance, against them. "I need to do an emergency conservation inspection," I urged. "Before the party, I need to document the state of the house, to ensure that irreplaceable fixtures are not being damaged or illegally altered, for the city's records." They agreed instantly. They drafted a letter, citing city ordinances for the protection of historic landmarks. It gave me, as the city's designated historical consultant, full legal right of entry to conduct an inspection. I would have access to the entire house, by order of the city, on the morning of the wedding. Sabina and Julian would be legally powerless to stop me. I had my key. The morning of the wedding. I arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. The Mercer house was unrecognizable. a hive of frantic, high-pitched activity. White vans lined the street. Caterers were shouting in the driveway. Florists were wrestling with massive, gaudy urns of flowers, and a private security team, conspicuous in their black suits, patrolled the perimeter. I walked up the main path, carrying my leather conservation toolkit in one hand and the court order from the Heritage Commission in the other. A security guard, all earpiece and testosterone, stepped in front of me. "Ma'am, this is a private event. I need you to—" I didn't stop walking. I simply held up the court order. "I am Ilara Vance, a city-appointed historical consultant. This is a legal warrant for an emergency inspection. You are required to grant me full and immediate access. If you obstruct me, you will be in violation of a court order." His eyes scanned the document. He looked at his partner. He was out of his depth. He stepped aside. I walked into my foyer. The chaos was worse inside, but I was a point of absolute calm in the center of the storm. It didn't take long for her to find me. Sabina came storming out of the salon, her face a mask of rage, already in a silk dressing gown. "What the hell are you doing here? Ilara!" she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "Trying to ruin this. How pathetic!" I turned from my examination of the staircase newel post and gave her a cold, polite smile. "Just making sure you don't damage the 19th century lime plaster. Sabina, this level of humidity from the flowers, all this heavy equipment, it's a structural risk. Structural integrity is everything, isn't it?" Her face tightened. She knew she couldn't stop me. "Just stay out of the way," she spat and swept off, shouting at a florist. I began my inspection. I moved with purpose, my toolkit in hand. I went through the salon, the dining room, my old study, taking notes on a clipboard. I measured walls. I tapped on plaster. I looked concerned. Every move was a performance, designed to look like a fussy, past-obsessed conservator. But I was just buying time, moving steadily toward my true objective, the library. The library was empty, mercifully quiet. They were using it as a staging area for the bar. I went straight to the grand fireplace, the one I had rebuilt by hand. During the restoration, I had found it a small, hollow cavity behind a loose brick in the firebox, a place where the original 19th century owner had hidden his private papers. I knelt down, shielding my body from the doorway, and pulled the brick loose. My hands were steady. I was not planting a bomb. I was setting a historical trap. I did not take anything out. I put something in, from my toolkit. I retrieved a small, voice-activated digital recorder and a microtransmitter, powerful enough to broadcast to a receiver several blocks away. I placed them deep inside the cavity. Next, I placed the copy of the fraudulent trust document, the one I had signed. I had used a red pen to circle the specific contradictory clauses, the Delaware jurisdiction, the waiver of assets. It was bait. I replaced the brick. It was a perfect fit, invisible to any eye but mine. My work was almost done. As I was leaving the library, I inspected the new, gleaming high-tech control panel Julian had installed for his Sonos sound system. I saw the new wiring, so carelessly run next to an original, unstable electrical socket. I plugged in my own heavy-duty diagnostic tool, a moisture meter, and pressed a test button. There was a sharp pop, a small puff of blue smoke, the smell of ozone. The Sonos panel went dead. I looked at it, a perfect mask of "oh dear." I knew that with the main system fried, and with only a few hours before the ceremony, the events team would be in a panic. They would be forced to use the house's original built-in public address system, a relic from the 1960s that I had restored. A system whose main junction box and microphone connections were, conveniently, located right next to the library fireplace. I was not there. I was 2 blocks away, sitting in the cramped, humid darkness of a surveillance van. David Liu sat beside me, his leg bouncing with a nervous energy he was trying to suppress. A federal lawyer I had only met twice watched a bank of monitors with a cold, professional calm. On the screens, my house was blazing. It was magnificent, transformed into a stage set. Julian had lit the exterior with a warmth that made the brick glow, and the gardens, the ones I had designed, cultivated, and planted, were draped in thousands of tiny, elegant white lights. 200 guests, perhaps more, mingled on the lawns I had restored, holding champagne, their voices a dull, collective murmur over our audio feed. I saw tech journalists, venture capitalists, and the oldest, most powerful families in Savannah. They were all there to witness the triumph. Marcus Cole was among them. He had entered as the +1 of a major New York investor, a man who was already cooperating with the SEC and who was visibly enjoying his role in the drama. I watched Marcus on a dedicated feed. He looked perfectly, almost wonderfully, bored as he accepted a glass of champagne. Then, the music changed. The guests found their seats in the rose garden. The ceremony was beginning. Julian and Sabina appeared. They walked down the aisle I had paved with reclaimed Savannah gray brick. He was breathtaking. He stood under the floral arch, the picture of a visionary, a king at his own coronation. Sabina, in a starkly modern, almost structural white gown, was his perfect, sharp-edged queen. The officiant, a prominent judge whose career Julian had practically funded, stepped forward. "We are gathered here tonight," the judge began, his voice booming over the speakers. Just as he spoke, I saw it on the monitor in high definition. Julian's left hand. His smart watch lit up with a notification. He glanced down, a movement so subtle most would have missed it. His eyes scanned the text. A slow, brilliant, uncontrollable smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. He looked at Sabina, his eyes shining, and in that moment, he had it all: the company, the woman, the house, and, as David and I already knew, the money. That notification was the one we had been waiting for. The final digital signature from his European investors, the Series C funding round, his $100 million prize, was complete. In the van, I looked at the small camera feed fixed on Marcus. He was standing at the back of the crowd, near the library. He saw the look on Julian's face. He knew what it meant. Marcus looked up, directly into the hidden camera he knew was there, and gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. This was it. The vows were a blur of arrogant promises. I heard Julian's voice, rich and confident, promising a future he had stolen. I heard Sabina's, crisp and possessive, sealing her partnership. "I do," Julian said. "I do." Sabina said. The judge beamed. Then, by the power vested in me, and in front of this wonderful gathering, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The crowd exploded in applause. The sound was a tidal wave, washing over our audio feed. In the van, we were silent. David Liu let out a breath that sounded like a sob. I watched Marcus. He did not clap. As the applause swelled, his hand went to his pocket. I saw his phone vibrate against the fabric of his suit. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen to confirm the transaction was locked, and his thumb moved quickly. He typed a single word and pressed send. Complete. He sent the message, not to me, but to the federal team waiting just beyond the perimeter. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket, his face a perfect, impassive mask of a guest enjoying the party. The party moved inside. The atmosphere was electric, charged with Julian's success. Champagne flowed. A jazz band played. Julian, holding Sabina's hand, stepped up to the small stage in the grand salon, ready to make his triumphant speech. He was a man who had just conquered the world, and he wanted his investors to see it. Just as he was about to tap the microphone, a man intercepted him. It was Arthur Harrington, the New York investor who had brought Marcus. "Julian, a word," Arthur said, his voice a friendly but firm baritone. Just need to clarify some of the SEC language on the new term sheet before I fly out. Julian, though annoyed at the interruption, could not refuse his largest investor. Of course, Arthur, right now. Won't take a minute. Let's find somewhere quiet. Sabina, ever the COO, tightened her grip on Julian's arm. Anything you need to discuss with him, Arthur, you can discuss with me. I am his partner, in all things. Excellent, Arthur said, gesturing toward the library. It's all about due diligence, isn't it? The three of them, Julian, Sabina, and Arthur, walked out of the salon and into the library. The trap was sprung. In the van, David Liu's fingers were flying across his keyboard. I'm in, he whispered. He's running the presentation video off the local network. What an amateur. Outside in the garden, and inside the salon, the massive video screens Julian had installed to showcase ether dynamics flickered. The looping, glossy corporate video stuttered and froze. In the library, Arthur Harrington closed the heavy oak doors. Look, Julian, he said. I'm hearing whispers, rumors about the origin of this mere CR algorithm. I'm about to wire $50 million. I need you to look me in the eye and assure me. On the monitors, I watched Julian. He was at his most arrogant, his most charming. He laughed, a dismissive, easy sound. Arthur, please. It's proprietary intellectual property. We built it from the ground up. Every line of code. And that was the trigger. The tiny recorder in the fireplace, voice activated and set to recognize Julian's specific biometric signature when speaking that exact lie, came to life. It fed its signal to the transmitter, which in turn broadcast to the junction box of the house's old, analog public address system, the system the events team had been forced to use. The jazz music in the salon and garden didn't just stop. It was violently cut off, replaced by a loud click and a wash of static. And then, a voice. Sabina's voice. Crisp, cold, and amplified throughout the entire 10,000 square foot property. Just get her to sign the trust. Once she signs, the house is ours. The 200 guests froze. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to mouths. Julian and Sabina, hearing themselves, were still inside the library, the sound echoing around them. Then, Julian's voice, from a different recording. Phasing out, Ilara clears the way for the merger. She's a sentimental fool. She'll never see it coming. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The tech journalists were already holding up their phones, recording. Then, the final devastating file. Sabina again, discussing the theft. David Liu thinks it was his we iterated on it. He can't prove a thing. The music was gone. The party was gone. The only sound was the disembodied, damning truth of their own voices, echoing through the house I had rebuilt. The silence that followed was absolute. Inside the library, Julian and Sabina turned to stone. Their faces, flushed with victory just moments before, were now a sickly, pale white. They recognized their own voices, their own conspiracy, echoing through the house. Julian was the first to move. He lunged for the door, shoving Arthur Harrington aside, and burst into the grand salon, his face a mask of pure panic. "Shut it off!" he screamed at the terrified events team. "Shut it off now." But it was far too late. The audio was only the beginning. As Julian's voice died, David Liu's main attack began. The massive video screens, which had been frozen, now flashed to life. They didn't show the Ether Dynamics logo. They showed 2 columns of text. On one side, emails from David Liu, time-stamped from 2 years ago, showing his original algorithm. On the other side, Julian's proprietary Mir-Seer code. It was a perfect match. A new, different sound filled the room, the sound of 200 phones being pulled out. The venture capitalists were not calling for help. They were calling their banks. The tech journalists, smelling the biggest story of their careers, were recording everything. Sabina, stumbling out of the library behind Julian, finally understood. She had just legally bound herself to a sinking, fraudulent ship. Her self-preservation kicked in, her voice rising in a shrill, desperate panic. "I thought you handled this," she shrieked at Julian, right there in the middle of the salon. "You told me Lou was a nobody. You told me this was clean." "Shut up, you fool," Julian hissed, grabbing her arm. And then, the heavy, original front doors of the Mercer house swung open. The entire party turned, expecting, perhaps, the final act of a jilted wife. But it wasn't me. It was two men in dark, identical suits, followed by Marcus Cole. The federal agents did not hesitate. They moved through the stunned crowd with an absolute, chilling authority. One agent spoke, his voice clear and cutting, needing no microphone. "Julian Croft and Sabina Hayes Croft, you are both under arrest for securities fraud and wire fraud." Julian began to scream. It was a primal, ugly sound. "She set me up, my ex-wife Alara." "She's obsessed! She's insane! She did this!" Marcus Cole stepped forward, his hands clasped calmly behind his back. He looked at Julian, not with anger, but with a mild academic interest. "Mr. Croft," he said, his voice easily carrying in the sudden tomb-like silence. "You closed your Series C funding round 30 minutes ago, based on fraudulent representations, and Mrs. Hayes Croft, as COO and, as of 40 minutes ago, your wife. You co-signed the final wire documents as a principal of the company right after you said, 'I do.' You both completed the fraudulent transaction after the ceremony was complete, binding you both to the crime. The agents were efficient. They cuffed them both. As they were led out, a stunned, silent pathway parting for them, they were walked directly past their 7-tier wedding cake. Just as Julian reached the doorway, he looked across the street. I was standing there, just outside the surveillance van, my arms folded. I had watched it all. He met my eyes. He was expecting tears, or a triumphant smile, or a wave goodbye. I gave him nothing. I simply watched, a historian documenting the precise, inevitable moment a structure, built on a rotten foundation, finally collapses under its own weight. I turned and walked away before they were even in the car. The house would probably be seized by the federal government as an asset bought with fraudulent funds. I didn't care. It was just a house. I had already recovered the only thing that mattered. I had restored the truth, and I was finally ready to build something new. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.